Welcome to Art Bazaar, a podcast that chats with artists of all types to explore the depths of creativity. Brought to you by the Alternative Gallery. We'll be releasing new episodes every Wednesday with bonus episodes dropping randomly. If you like what you're hearing, you can support this podcast by going to thealternativegallery.com and clicking on the podcast tab. I'm your host, Brandon Wonder, Creative Director of the Alternative Gallery, a non-profit arts organization in Allentown, PA, run through the efforts of dedicated volunteers. On this episode of Art Bazaar, we'll be chatting with Andrew McIntosh, aka DJ Arm 18, a professor, DJ, and writer from the Lehigh Valley. Andrew is one of the co-founders of Nite Liters LLC, an all-vinyl DJ collective that hosts as well as takes part in all types of live events, bringing crates of vinyl with everything from funk and soul to rock, blues, hip-hop, and more. You can check them out on social media on both Facebook and Instagram, DJ Arm 18 and Nite Liters LLC. That's NITELITERS LLC. Andrew, welcome to Art Bazaar.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Oh, I'm pumped after the intro. Thank you. Making me feel big. It's
all
like
right.
we're doing things big.
You're multi-hyphenate. You do a lot of good stuff, and we're going to get into all that great stuff today.
Word up.
How'd you do with the snow this week?
I had forgotten that we had no snow last year, right?
I think it's been almost 2 years since we had an inch.
Right. I hadn't missed it. I really didn't.
No.
It looks good, but the fallout, like the digging out, etc. Yeah.
It's funny, here in Allentown, I don't know if it's the same over where you're at, but here in Allentown, it's like the only people on the road are the cars that should not be driving in the snow.
Right. Fishtailing left and right.
It's like only cars with front-wheel drive. They can't go up the slightest incline. It's kind of humorous.
Right. Anytime I'm driving in snow, I have only one purpose, and that's to get there safely.
Exactly.
Like there's no style points, So like when people start gunning it, I'm like, what are you doing?
And it's been so long since we had real snow. I guess people forgot how to drive and behave in the snow. So it's been a bit humorous for me when I was out there shoveling, watching all these guys fishtailing all over the road. But surprisingly, no car accidents. I didn't see any car accidents, which is
good.
Great.
That's
and
good.
It's a very 4th and Tillman here. It's an extremely busy cross street. So
Sure.
So for those who aren't aware of DJ Arm 18, can you please describe what it is you do?
Well, you know what? Thank you for describing me of all these different titles, because I'd like to say I'm a little bit of a Renaissance b-boy, if you will. I grew up listening to hip-hop fortunately at a young age, getting radio tapes from the city. Came to me from my older siblings who shared with me. I want to give a big shout out to Sam Alljam from South Side of Bethlehem. He's one of South Bethlehem's first DJs. I listened to one of his mixtapes when I was a youngin', and it got me really interested in, at the time, what was called jam music, right? And that was hip-hop. It was Run DMC, but it was also Michael Jackson. It could be any of that early 80s music that just was, stuff you could break to, etc. I became very, very interested in that. Even though I'm living in Bethlehem, I want to be clear, I don't have any street cred or anything. I was fascinated with the music. It drew me in. And so I collected tapes, making the tapes off the radio, started collecting vinyl at the age of, 9, 10 years old. And that became, I'll be honest, I did that stuff in my bedroom for a long time. It sounds crazy now, but being involved in hip hop as a white dude there was a lot of pushback. I wouldn't say from people of color, but other white friends and so on. Why are you into that? That's not your music. So I did my thing on the side. I didn't even really think that it could become what you just described me as. If my little self could see this now, man, my mind would be blown, right? So it finally came together for me actually in college, where I went to an upstate New York college, Bard College, after graduating from a high school, Liberty High School in Bethlehem. And when I went there, I'll never forget someone I knew who was already there. The night before they called, they were like, "Did you pack up your turntables and your records and all that stuff?" I was like, "No, what do I need that for?" And they were like, "Are you kidding? You've got to bring that up." And so I did, much to my father's chagrin, who thought the car was packed. I was like, well, now we got to bring these 2 crates and this. And when I got up there, this is where I began to fuse sort of academia and hip hop, because I got first and foremost a chance to throw parties and see what it was really about to be a DJ. It was at a time in the mid-90s where hip-hop was continually growing creatively. There was a lot going on. It was going in many different directions. And then academically, I was very fortunate that even though I was somewhat wayward as a student, I kind of majored in partying, I'll be honest, I had a professor take me under his wing and say, you could study hip hop. I can help you out with this. Like, you don't have to flunk out. Like, I was on academic, like
At that time, I imagine hip hop wasn't anywhere in the curriculum.
correct. So a big shout to a professor of American history named Mark Lytle, who essentially said, let's figure out how, where does hip hop come from? Do you know? And I'm like, yeah, it's from the Bronx. And he's like, well, what does that mean? And he encouraged me to study it. So I was able to pursue an American Studies degree studying the socioeconomic conditions of hip hop that helped create. I flipped that to an opportunity at Lehigh University, and that's where I got my master's, going a little bit further in the research, both quantitative and qualitatively, in order to get my master's degree from Lehigh. And from that point, let's say about 20 years ago, I had been, kind of teaching at Lehigh University, hip-hop classes. Hadn't yet landed a full-time gig at Northampton Community College, where I'm at now. And then I was like kind of DJing or, writing, music journalism on the side. And these things were very separate. They were in different lanes, if you will. And I don't know if I'm answering your question directly. It's taken the last 2 decades for all these different strands in my life to kind of come together, so that when you talk about the Nite Liters and me going out to DJ, like, some sort of disco party at Music Fest, it actually is informed by my work as a hip hop academic. 10, 15 years ago, it might not have been, because they were just different spheres. But now, I think you would agree with me, we can have conversations with artists and educators, practitioners of hip hop, of audience members. And dare I say, even like, business owners and maybe even some people, city council members, who have begun to understand how all of these things are interwoven into American popular culture, right?
Absolutely.
I feel like, do I wish I would have blown up in the 90s and been like, because, big shout to Mike Lovinett, King Magnetic, Jinx Rhymeslayer, Tug McGraw, like, we were the next Wu-Tang coming out of Lehigh Valley. Well, it didn't necessarily work out, but like maybe for the work I was doing, I needed the time to kind of grow into this role and sort of have the environment be more receptive to this sort of, as I said, Renaissance abilities that I have. I'm not strictly a party DJ. I'm not strictly a professor. I'm not strictly a party promoter or an author. I do all of these things, and they all inform each other.
I think, honestly, you had to wait for American society to catch up to what you wanted to do. Because, B104, for example, I remember, I'm wearing a DMX t-shirt here right now. He was one of my favorite rappers growing up. I remember trying to call B104 to get him to play some of my favorite songs. It was something simple, like a Puff Daddy song. Right. And they were like, we don't play rap.
Nope.
Now you listen to B104, 8 out of 10 songs are probably rap or hip hop. It's become the new pop music.
Absolutely.
So now, because it's proven itself probably on the financial aspect of it, I think that's what opened up a lot of eyes and made it more acceptable. And also, I think the kids that grew up with it now are the people in charge, and they're letting these things in more.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I'm broadly generalizing, but Gen X are the gatekeepers now, in a way. Where we grew up, and it was very common for us to hear Motown or the Beatles or the Stones in movies and television, etc., in the 80s and 90s. Well, now that next generation has now incorporated hip hop into popular entertainment and so on.
Even commercials.
Right. Like, I'm shopping and I'll hear some dope breaks at Wegmans, and I'm like, does that mean I'm a Wegmans DJ that I played this record last weekend? And I'm like, you know what? I'm not mad at that. If the music is moving us, and a lot of this music I think is ultimately very positive, I think that's a good thing. It's very nice of you to say, like, society had to catch up to me. And the Alternative Art Gallery is an example of this. 20 years ago, this was almost but impossible, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And so I kind of think of it as soil. Anybody who, if you're listening to this and you're an artist here in the Lehigh Valley, you know that this soil is tough to grow in. I don't know if it's because it's brown soil, all the industry just kind of
very rocky.
Yeah, damaged it, or it's the geography, whatever it is, our blue collar approach sometimes to, like, you can't eat a painting. What are you going to do with that? I think we have begun to change the narrative, where I think the arts and artists and performance here in the Lehigh Valley is recognized, one, as there's actually a rich history here. You just got to look for it. And two, there is a tremendous amount of synergy between all of these artists in a place such as this that really is coming of age, I think. It's taken a while, but...
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it, coming of age. Because when we started the Alternative Gallery in 2012, the city was very against street art and murals.
Right.
You saw almost none back then.
Yep.
When we did the first Arts Fest in 2014, we had to fight the Allentown Police Department to have those graffiti panels, of which we were building these walls, paying for everything, doing the cleanup. There was nothing for them to worry about. And the graffiti artists and the street artists were so worried that a lot of them actually wrapped T-shirts around their heads to hide their identities. And it was after that first Arts Fest when they saw the positive response from the community, mainly families. They're like, wow, this maybe isn't what we thought it was.
Right.
And I think, in all honesty, that is what changed the approach to street art in the city of Allentown. Now, Arts Fest might not be credited as such on the city level, but those that work in it, they kind of know that was when the turning point was. So I don't say that to kind of show what we did, but to show how recently it was still an obstacle to have what we think should have been the norm back in the late 80s at the very least.
Right, absolutely. You know, if you take a look at the history of hip-hop, in a lot of ways, hip-hop being regarded as art, particularly the street graffiti art being embraced by the downtown scene, that opened a lot of doors, not just for graffiti artists, you know, like Lee, Pink, etc., but also for Grandmaster Flash, the Cold Crush, etc. Those artists got a wider audience when they came downtown in Manhattan. And Manhattan is a very cosmopolitan borough of New York. A lot of people who are going to Manhattan, they don't live in Manhattan. They live in Jersey. They live in PA. They live in London. They live in Paris. They're visiting. And so they were experiencing hip hop, and it helped, if you will, take this culture beyond just, you know, the uptown and the Bronx.
Cross-pollinate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm hoping that that similar thing is sort of occurring right now. There was a big concern of mine in the work that I do is celebrating hip hop's 50th anniversary. Yeah, I don't want this to be a eulogy. Let's be clear, right? There is a tendency in our disposable popular culture discourse to consume and then disregard. And I didn't want hip-hop to kind of be presented as, well, look how hip-hop started and what it became, and that's good, and now we're done with it. I'm taking my lead a lot from the Questloves and the LL Cool J's, who are operating on a much bigger stage than I am. But even in the work that I'm doing here in Eastern PA, Lehigh Valley, what I'm discovering is that there is, I'm going to use the word appreciation, almost like it's fine art or fine wine. There's an appreciation like, oh, hip-hop from this era, incorporating the four elements of b-boying and graph and DJing and MC, like, this is something a little different, you know? And I don't really expend my energy, like, get off my lawn. I don't like new rap or hip-hop. I don't care. Like, I get it. It's for that generation. It appeals to kids. Some of it I dig and plug into. But a lot of it, you know, I'll be honest, I'm old school like I mean it. I'm into the, not just the preservation, but the experience of what is often called old school hip-hop, finding venues and avenues for people to experience that, whether it's in a classroom or whether it's in a club, to get them that opportunity to be like, oh, so this is how it should be done, you know?
It's funny that you mention the 50th anniversary as potentially eulogy. I took it very differently. I took it as seeing some of these spaces hosting 50th anniversary hip-hop events, that it's like, wait, 10 years ago, you wouldn't touch hip-hop with a 10-foot pole.
Nope.
I was more concerned about it being exploited. Mm-hmm. Because the only reason they're doing that is because they know it's not going away. Mm-hmm. They know that it's only going to keep growing. And I'm also in the same boat with you with new music. I'm getting older. My tastes are kind of stuck in the past in some ways. I mean, hell, right now, I mainly listen to jazz music from 100 years ago. So if anyone's stuck in the past in this conversation, it's probably me.
Break out the 78s.
Exactly, right?
Word.
I got some over there. But I think what much of the new music, which is regarded as rap or hip-hop, it's almost its own genre. And I think that's where a lot of the old school guys are kind of beating on. And it's like, wait, no, you're disregarding what was important to us just for you to kind of claim it as your own. Mm-hmm. I think that is where that animosity comes from. You know, Busta Rhymes is one of them that's really outspoken about that, which I agree with. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, there's no rules to art.
Yeah.
So is there any new music that's really capturing you?
Oh, man. You're going to put me on the spot. No.
That's okay.
I'm a little overwhelmed by our streaming, media ecology.
Do you do streaming?
In terms of listening to streaming music?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the part that overwhelms me is I don't have the same relationship to it that I did with my vinyl and CDs and tapes, because I don't know what I'm listening to. I'm like, oh, yo, this new stuff is hot. And then like I go and look at the notes and it's like, oh, it came out in 2017. Like I just, you know what I mean? It's actually a couple years old. And then there's also, not for nothing, like some of these dates that you see on Spotify, et cetera, are not accurate, you know, which also distorts it will be the date in which it was posted to stream, but not
wow.
necessarily when it was recorded. I will say the plus side of that, in my experience as an educator, as a father, and being around young adults, what I do dig is that when I was a kid, I wouldn't dare touch disco. Disco's whack. That's from the 70s. You know what I mean? Like, I had to disown it. I'm into hip hop. I'm into like what's hitting now. And what I see roughly since streaming began to occur in the middle of the last decade is that the youth, they were not bound by time because of the access. And because they're not bound by time, they're also not bound by genre. And it's just perfectly normal to be talking to kids these days that in my classroom who are like into anything from Led Zeppelin to whatever artist is blowing up right now. Like, it's just, they may not have listened to the entire Led Zeppelin catalog, but they know a couple songs and they like appreciate it. You know,
that's great.
My daughter, I'll give an example. Catherine is like, she's hit me to French pop music from the 60s that I like. I know Serge Gainsbourg, but that's about it. And she's showing me all these other artists. At the same time, she's like, have you heard Doja Cat's new single? And I'm like, how? All of this is one for her, right? It's coming through the same device, etc. There's a certain beauty in that. Like, as you said, there are no rules. And like, I do kind of dig that. A lot of us, we have very cherished memories about how we got the music, how we experienced it, the tactile feel of our media, and so on. That stuff's hard to beat, but I do like how seemingly open-minded I see a lot of the youth.
Yeah, it sounds like there's definitely pros and cons to that situation, and kind of reflecting on what you just said, I think maybe part of the reason where it's almost like a blending of subcultures, or I don't want to say an erasure of subcultures because that makes it sound like it's intentional, but I think as a byproduct of what we're going through, subcultures aren't as strong because they thrive in physical spaces. And we have less and less of these physical spaces. An example of which is, like just a few weeks ago, we lost the legendary Double Decker Records.
Right. Yes.
Which was, probably 2/3 of the stuff sitting here in my office, music-wise.
Why you got to bring this up, man? You want me to cry on the mic? Is that what it's about to happen
here? I guess
here?
since we're on it, what was your response when you found out Double Decker was closing?
So Double Decker Records is hands down, this is not a subjective opinion, was one of the best record stores in the Mid-Atlantic region. I say this not only because of my experience there and people who I know shop there, but more than once I've been in other places and at other record stores talking to record store owners or record buyers and said, yeah, I'm from Eastern PA, Allentown, Bethlehem. And they look at me and they're like, Double Decker Records, right? And I'm like, yeah, of course. And they're like, that place is amazing, right? Jamie Holmes, the owner, he had this phrase. He used to say, it's a record store, not a museum. And that meant a lot of titles moved through that store.
Very quickly.
Very quickly. And so you weren't, for me as a record buyer, record digger, I was never bored. And almost like a monetized living library. Like, I learned a lot. Like, there were times where I would go through the record crates and I was like, Jamie, I didn't buy anything today, but I learned a lot about music today. I saw titles and artists and genre like I didn't even know existed, etc. And so in that sense, I thought it was a great retail record store. The flip side of it, the part that probably hurts a little more, is the memories. It very much had a very real and identifiable community of anything from weirdos to, international record buyers to live events. I was fortunate enough to host a variety of events. Not for nothing, I had my 40th birthday party there. You know what I mean? Like, it was a blast,
That's amazing.
Eating barbecue off of like 12-inch record cover.
Wow.
I think we got the opportunity for those of us who were involved on that level to kind of maximize what Jamie was doing, behind the counter. Like, that's a transactional kind of thing. I think we were able to take that and say, everybody felt like that was on the up and up. It was worthwhile, good prices, good products. And we were able to sort of, if you will, celebrate the fellowship of digging. No matter what, what kind of DJ you were or record collector you were. It was particularly fun to watch like young heads just be awoken to records there,
Just starting their journey of collecting physical formats.
Yeah.
And Jamie might not have intended for the place to become a museum, but in its own way it was.
Yeah.
And not even so much for the exact relics that it was showcasing, but again, going back to what we had just mentioned, the kind of losing of those physical spaces, of which now that Double Decker is gone, it leaves a massive gap in the area that even if you open another record store, it's going to take a very long time for that gap to be filled. And for someone like me, where do you go to get records now? Like seriously, where do you go? Like when you go digging, when you want to go shopping for records?
Well, that's what's funny, man. Like, we're back to where it was like 20 years ago. I'm not going to mention it because spots are now getting scarce again.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
I know.
I'll be honest. I would not tell people where I found record. Like, where'd you get?
All good diggers are like that, man.
And then Double Decker kind of like leveled the playing field where I was like, no, listen, you got to come to Double Decker.
Yeah.
I never felt threatened because I always knew you'd always find something
Well, and
there.
the quantity of stuff he would get, and he had the perfect philosophy. He's not going to charge eBay prices. He's not charging what you're going to pay online. He's putting a price to sell, a price to move quickly.
Put it this way, to answer that a little more directly, I find myself traveling out of the Lehigh Valley. You're correct. There's not anything truly comparable. There's some cool record stores. Shout out to Easton Music Exchange. Even the Compact Disc Center in Bethlehem Mary and the Gang have cool titles. In Allentown, I can't really think of anything.
Well, we lost Merchant Square
And
Mall.
we lost Merchant Square.
And then Mercantile just closed over at the South Mall, which was another place.
Yep.
So we kind of have to rely on these pop-up events like Playback, which, again, that's not in Allentown. It's over in, well, it was Albertus now. Was at the last one was at the...
in Kutztown.
Renninger's,
Yeah.
Which is great.
Yeah, Dave gets a lot of great... Dave Garton gets a lot of great vendors there.
Yeah, I mean, Dave's amazing.
What the Nite Liters has been able to spin there, and, Dave... He pays us, but I'm pretty sure I spend whatever he pays us on the record vendors.
I remember that. Yeah, last time you and I were digging right next to each other, and I was looking over. I'm like, shit, he found that. I didn't get to that first.
Listen, you brought something up that if I could wax professorially about, and I think it's a really important idea. There's two of them. I heard from you over the last few minutes this idea of, man, why are you celebrating hip hop now? You weren't doing that 10 years ago. And you've also talked about spaces, like public physical spaces and the lack thereof. I want to explore those two ideas, if you will, because I think there's something important that people should consider. One is that you're absolutely correct that hip-hop, let's regard hip-hop as its four elements for this conversation. We'll say the activities of b-boying, graffiti, DJing, and MCing. Let's not forget those four acts were illegal in New York City, right?
That's right.
And so graph, obviously, most significantly, bombing trains and public spaces was particularly policed and came with it a variety of fines. And Michael Stewart in 1984 lost his life in New York City. NYPD arrested a young graffiti writer. And, as the reports go, he might have been unruly in his jail cell, but I don't think it warranted his eventual beating and death. That chilled the graffiti movement, They spent millions and millions of dollars to try to buff those trains, to stop graffiti, et cetera, because unlike places in Europe where they figured out ways to incorporate it into their city fabric and their city planning, there's none of that in New York, right? It's private property.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been such an easy fix to just work with the graffiti writers with the trains.
Oh, my God.
The whole idea was a moving art gallery. Like, it's so cool.
And if you look, they now wrap trains. They put corporate advertising on trains.
Because that's an improvement.
Right. So graffiti, breakdancing, you're breakdancing on a subway platform, you could get arrested for that. The fabled stories of the jams out in the parks in the Bronx and the other boroughs, they're tapping into street lights, etc. The only reason why these parties were able to come off like they did was that these were zones of abandonment. These were communities that essentially were grossly underfunded, had no tax base, and a lot of the civil services that we come to expect when you live in a city, they didn't exist in the Bronx. And so these kids, they took what they could find and made activities and culture out of it, right?
Yeah, as Tupac would describe it, the rose that grew from the concrete.
Exactly, right? And so we're putting these things on a pedestal now and we applaud them, but let's not forget the struggle that was required to even sort of bring these things forth into existence. Nobody called it hip hop. Nobody said, yo, check it out what we're doing in 50 years. It was just a part of the activities. And that's one thing, like, I mean, I'm not about to breakdance anytime soon, and my tag is kind of whack, right? But I'd like to say I have the gift of gab or what have you, and obviously I DJ, but so many of those who were involved in hip-hop in the first 10, 15 years, they did a little bit of everything. When hip-hop becomes sort of incorporated into our popular music industry, slowly but surely, like, graffiti ends up in art gallery spaces and sort of contained there. And breakdancing, in a lot of ways, it's so difficult to do. Big shout out to Break and Steel. You see the time they put into it, the risk, the physical risk. It's not something you just kind of pick up watching a video and like, I'm going to start breakdancing. Like it's...
Oh, yeah, you put your body through it.
Right. So like that kind of gets put to the side. And DJs and MCs sort of become the story of rap in the 1980s. And for a while, it was Eric B. and Rakim, DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince. Like DJs were a big part of it. I don't think there was any grand conspiracy, but at some point, record labels, A&R men, etc., say to themselves, all right, who's the most commodifiable person here? It's that guy with the charisma on the microphone.
And they're looking for a star.
Exactly. Unfortunately, that becomes the definition of what hip hop is.
Yeah.
What's going on with rap music. That's what I'm really hoping is coming out of this 50-year celebration, is that we expand the conversation of what hip hop is, right? That we stop boxing it into what's rap nowadays. Whatever rap is nowadays, that's what's hip hop nowadays. I think some of these practices, let's say graffiti, it's not strictly confined to art galleries. It lives alive and well on freight trains, you know?
Sure does. And under bridges and abandoned buildings.
Correct. It still exists. We know that there's an underground for the music as well. And what I've learned working with Break and Steel, et cetera, is this almost like a cabal society of b-boys who get together and battle all throughout the country, the world really, right? Who they practice their craft with the seriousness of monks.
It's now in the Olympics.
Word.
That's how serious it's been taken.
Yeah, it's something to keep in mind. This something was illegal, the amount of effort it took.
It was a true uphill battle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, you couldn't get anyone to respect it outside of that culture. It was very similar to heavy metal in that way, which I thought was very interesting, that there was a satanic panic of the 1980s regarding heavy metal music.
Yeah.
And I forget what news station it was, but they interviewed a bunch of kids and teenagers that were into heavy metal. And then they did a follow-up 30 years later to show that these children have grown into very well-adjusted adults.
Yes.
So the satanic panic was literally for nothing.
Right.
And I think the same applies to hip-hop.
Yeah.
I wrote something in a paper in my senior year of high school where it was about hip-hop, and I was trying to get across to people that if you're criticizing, say, a certain rapper because they're rapping about violence and drugs and shooting and things like that, it's like, what perspective is a drug dealer going to rap from? From the perspective of a drug dealer. Mm-hmm. You mentioned it before, Rakim, who I think is the greatest lyricist of all time, he was dropping the knowledgeable hip-hop. Mm-hmm. People like him and Big Daddy Kane, and I think now the best of the best with that is Black Thought.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And, it showed that hip-hop can be socially conscious, which in the beginning, hip-hop was socially conscious. Think about a lot of those songs in the 1980s. They were like anti-crack songs and anti-drug songs,
right? Because
they were trying to improve their communities.
Right.
Because, like you said, too, there was no purpose for the roots of hip-hop's beginning. It was, hey, I'm going to throw this party in an abandoned building or a park and just come hang out. Mm-hmm. That was how it started. And then guys just starting to jump on the mic, say things over, 2 records getting cut back and forth, keeping the beat going. Mm-hmm. There was no intention behind it, and a whole culture grew out of it.
Yes.
And it took over the entire world. And now you teach it in college.
Yeah, right, right. It's wild in that sense. As we said, it really wasn't identified as hip-hop until the early 1980s. I want to say an article in the Village Voice by a journalist named Steve Hager was interviewing Bambaataa. And Bambaataa always had a vision. A lot of people credit him as coming out of the Black Spades, the gang in the Bronx, and taking some of those same gang members and putting them in the Zulus and, his first hip hop crew. And he had this vision of transferring energy from gangbanging to hip hop competitive practices. They didn't call it that.
It was like a positive outlet for it.
Yeah. And let's be clear, I don't want to imagine everybody in the Bronx holding hands and singing Kumbaya as they join into a hip hop battle, right?
That was certainly not the case.
No. And it is a little bit of a white liberal narrative to be look at the positive aspects. Remember, as you rightfully said, people came together literally out of nothing, out of where can we go to be safe amongst ourselves, to celebrate our lives, even though if you look at the Bronx, it looks like shelled out German cities in World War II, we're living in these areas where arson runs rampant. I've often heard the word chaos, by those who were in that time period. And they had to make sense out of the chaos. Their families had to remain intact. They had to figure out how to make ends meet, friendships, etc. The practices that we're talking about were an outlet for that, to kind of create some sort of bond where there was none.
There was no physical space to support those things because it was so new.
Essentially, the New York education system had, if you recall, in the mid-1970s, I think it was 77, New York City's essentially went bankrupt and appealed to the federal government for funds to keep its schools open, its colleges open, its services running. The president at the time, Gerald Ford, told the city, no, it's okay if you default. It's okay if you don't provide those services. Essentially, the headline in the newspaper was Ford to city, drop dead. That's what these kids were contending with. just this notion of we're an abandoned nation. we're American citizens, and we've essentially been forgotten. Building on this, I think a lot of the hip hop artists of the late 80s, early 90s, the Rakim, KRS, Chuck D, etc., they seized upon those moments, watching what happened, right? And began to talk about this systemically. Like, this isn't just New York in the 70s, but there is something rotten to the core in America that we have to identify, right? And what I find interesting is that those ideas are now basically a part of our common discourse. You turn on MSNBC or Fox News, they're essentially saying the same things that rap artists were saying in the 80s and 90s. This is a country built on lies, and that we have to come to terms with those lies. I'm not really sure our political parties want to come to terms, but I always felt that hip hop was putting it in our face.
So much of activism now is about these root issues that were talked about back then.
Yes, absolutely. And so it's interesting to see these things come around. As a professor, assigning my students to listen to, anybody from NWA to Boogie Down Productions to Black Star, recordings that are 30, 25 years old. And the students are like, oh, wow, this really speaks to the moment I've grown up in the Black Lives Matter movement. Like, I didn't realize that it had been continuing on.
And this is why art is so important. Like we were talking about before we started recording the podcast, art has the power to shape the world.
Yes.
And it's all in what you want to use it for. And these recordings, and for me, long before it became popular music, hip hop was modern folk music to me.
Yeah, great way to put it.
It was the music of the people. Like, I see graffiti and street art, that is modern folk art. Mm-hmm. It is art for the people. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that, this is our plight. We're trying to share with the rest of the world what we're going through because we don't want to go through this.
Right.
We don't want anyone else to go through this. That person may have children. They don't want their kids going through that same situation that they went through. And decade after decade, deaf ears.
Can I address something real quick for anybody who, God forbid, they're thinking like, oh, all you're worried about is the plight of black people and people of color. Like, white people are struggling too. And it's like, oh yeah, 100%. Because you had mentioned it a few moments ago. If you read the narratives of punk coming out of London and the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and you read the narratives of hip hop in the Bronx, these are the same stories of disenfranchised youth, right? Of underclass youth with literally no options, an education system that's crumbling, no employment opportunities, no entry-level jobs. Deindustrialization has absolutely leveled these cities. And for hip-hop, we've spent a couple minutes here talking about what they did. In punk, they started smashing guitars, right? They started, cutting
True rebellion.
Right. They started wiling out. And it is, to me, it's the same gesture. And so when you get to the 80s and 90s and it's like the dark impulses of heavy metal, they're not getting it. These are kids that are not in urban environments, not connected to the black music traditions, but they're espousing some of the same feelings of alienation, of taking a look at our education systems, our government systems, our media systems, and saying, this isn't working. This doesn't speak to me. It doesn't see me. And it's not being honest.
Well, and I think at the very least, it's a simple reminder that we're supposed to have a system that works for all.
Yes.
And when you have a system that's largely not working for a lot of people,
right?
Well, you're kind of wrong or you're lying. Which one is it?
Yeah.
And neither are acceptable. And we want change. And we want it now, damn it.
Right.
And how is it taking this long to get what I see as very basic improvements to quality of life?
Yeah.
I don't see it getting any better, unfortunately. It just seems the same fight continues generation after generation, which is why this music is no less important.
Yeah.
And I think one of the most powerful things that's come out of this is because hip-hop has become the new pop music. Mm-hmm. It's made a lot of these people rich.
Right.
And you see a lot of these artists, they're using the money to change their communities.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like Akon. Mm-hmm. The rapper, he goes to Africa and village after village builds them renewable energy resources and access to clean drinking water.
Right.
That's something that's life-changing to so many people.
Yeah, I don't think we hear about those narratives enough, right? I think about this in professional sports too. I've always wanted to know that if you took the collective giving of every professional sports athlete, proportionately, I'm going to imagine it's a much bigger part of their salaries than that of the billionaire owners of those organizations.
Oh, for sure.
Right? The billionaires, they write $1 million checks that are like nothing, but you have these individuals who go, as you say, give back to their community, and it's a much bigger portion of their income.
Because they actually came from that situation.
Right.
Very
Right.
few billionaires have come from that.
It's interesting you say, like, we're fighting the same fight. I guess I'll frame it as the fight takes on different contours, different angles, and so on.
There's always nuance.
Yeah, I think there's a fog right now. It was pretty clear what was building up in the 2010s. I think there was, I don't know how else to say it, but just an unacknowledged public, it was like a denial of the police state of America. You know what I mean?
Which they've now admitted.
Right, which they now admit it. Now, what's bothersome is that it's like, well, now they've admitted, they've attached cameras to everybody, but things still happen, right? Like, we still haven't addressed it systemically. That's the fog that I'm in. I'm like, I think there has been progress. I think there are communities and conversations and connections we don't hear about that are absolutely mind-blowing in the United States that make this beautiful struggle of an experimental democracy. Like, we don't hear enough of that. There's way too much money being made off of pointing out the misery and disconnection,
Yeah. So how do you think the arts can be a positive force to fix social issues?
You had brought this up, as you were saying, we had a brief convo before we hit record about artists having a role in the shaping of your community, in the planning of your community, and the activism that's in your community. And I think that's 100% true. When I think about what I understand about hip-hop, is that while hip-hop artists weren't necessarily involved politically in the late 1970s and early 1980s as they emerged from the Bronx, they were changing the nature of what could be considered art, which is a very radical political and philosophical idea. And it changed the playing field of who got paid and who was being recognized, right? Jean-Michel Basquiat is an excellent example of that. We could debate for hours about, like, what, is it art? Or it's like, it doesn't matter. Like, it was a game changer. And I do think artists have almost a responsibility to that. I would argue, like, because you had mentioned, well, not all artists feel like that, And I would say, I get it. Then do your art really well, because that will benefit us all.
Yeah.
And I want to give you a hip hop example of it. This is like I have a great convo with Cap C about this. Big shout out to Cap C, because he's a big part of some of my brainstorming and working with me. But I have a newfound respect for LL Cool J. As a rap artist in the 1980s, 90s, and beyond, like, there was criticism that, all L raps about is himself. Like, he's either bad or he's a ladies' man, etc. There's no real substance to what LL does. In the era of Public Enemy and BDP, he did Walking with a Panther, where he's, holding bottles of champagne and, in front of a dope car. And in a lot of ways, he presaged that imagery that was going to come to dominate hip hop in the later decades. And what I see LL done starting about, I don't know, roughly 10 to 15 years ago, beginning with Sirius Satellite Radio, he took a channel called Backspin that played old school hip hop. And he was like, okay, it's just playing old school hip hop. We have an entire sort of culture and artists around it. Why aren't they not on the radio being interviewed and talked about? How was this music made? What did it mean? And he essentially bought it and created Rock the Bells. And then he began the Rock the Bells, or maybe it was in conjunction, I don't know the actual history, but the Rock the Bells Festival, which was, okay, why do we just put Redman out on a tour? Why don't we get Redman, Method Man, and these artists collectively and bring them around? And that proved to be successful. And he's been the spearhead of a lot of the tours in the last 50 years. So I'm now regarding LL as like, wait, this is a dude that there isn't a whole lot in his catalog where he's dropping science. You know what I mean? Like, he's a dope rapper.
Yeah, very simple. Yeah.
Right. He's a dope rapper. He, I sometimes don't know if he gets enough credit for, he has different flows. He could be very simple. He could be complex battle rapper. He could do a lot of different things. He'd be the first, I think, to tell you, I'm not Mos Def. I'm not, Ice Cube or whatever. So he did his art for these 40 plus years. And as, he has a big acting career as well, took all of that influence, that leverage, and he's put on the culture. So that would be my thing to other artists. Like, if you don't necessarily think, have anything for the community right now, that's fine. Do your thing, like, and do it really well. Because you never know how, this is the JFK quote, like, the rising tide raises all boats,
Yep.
Like, we can, as long as it doesn't become trickle-down economics and that Reaganomic bullshit. But
that didn't work.
Just the notion of the development of a community can come in a lot of different forms.
Well, and I think too, as an artist and a person that runs an art and cultural space, obviously I encourage and celebrate individualism. I'm interested and curious to see what an individual can create and put out there. But at the same time, like we were talking about again before the podcast started, the way I run this place here, what is most important for the people involved with this space, it's putting the community here first. Because if you don't do that, if you put the community here at risk in pursuit of your own personal work, it's going to hurt the community.
Yes.
Potentially to a point where that community no longer exists.
Mm-hmm.
So is it worth it? Because in the end, that community is the one that should be the most supportive of what you do. If you cut your own arm off, how do you expect to keep going?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what's lost so much anymore is that, again, physical spaces. Mm-hmm. No matter where technology takes us, we're going to need these physical gathering spaces.
Right.
And I think like last year, one of the most successful things we've done in our entire existence as the Alternative Gallery was these artist meetups. Just getting artists to hang out together.
Yes.
Don't bring out your art. Don't do anything. Just be in the same room together and just talk to one another. Mm-hmm. That has had the greatest impact, especially now in a digital age.
Yeah.
So I think it's really harming the arts not having enough spaces.
Yeah.
Like, again, you have to leave the Lehigh Valley to go look for records. It's crazy.
For the moment, yeah.
This is, not really super related to what we were just talking about, but I'm curious because it is on my list here. Do you collect just vinyl or do you collect CDs as well?
Just vinyl.
Just vinyl?
I mean, if a pile of CDs ends up in my lap, I'll keep them if I want them, but I only collect vinyl.
Yeah?
Yeah.
What is the importance of physical media to you?
They're like books. Every record crate is a history book, right? Like encyclopedias. What I find fascinating about physical media, even newer stuff, they don't give you as much information on the newer stuff. You ever notice that? Like a lot of new artists are mad abstract. Like I open up I get their Gatefold album and I'm like, okay, here's another picture, but give me some substance. I want to know where you recorded. I want to know the session players.
And that was the whole point of the LP, was to give all that information and the imagery.
Yes.
It was
Yes.
something to look at and take in while you listen to the music.
Right. I did have the privilege of a college education where I took some jazz history classes, but beyond those classes, what I know about jazz, Blue Note Records, they give you the entire story of what went into the recording of that particular album and what artists are on it.
Yeah,
like,
the history of the artist, where they were born.
The session players as well, the songs and the history of the songs. Like, Round Midnight, you get to understand is a standard. Like, that's what I love about physical media, is that I think there's often a story beyond just the music that can be found. So that's why I continue to gravitate to vinyl.
And I'm glad you said library, because that's how I feel about it too. It's not, a library shouldn't just be composed of books. Mm-hmm. I mean, movies on, whether it's disc or tape, obviously at this point disc, because tape doesn't have the same fidelity. It's not going to last as long. In the era of Blu-ray, do you really need VHS? But to have these things accessible, to pull off your shelf, to feel like you actually own it and you're building a collection to hand down. And it's like a phone book. Sure, your number might be in that phone book, but unless someone knows to look for it, they're not going to find it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the big problem with streaming now, whether music or movies.
It's a great analogy.
There is so much content, and the fact that it's even called content drives me crazy.
Yes. It's pejorative. Agreed.
How are you going to boil down art and literature and filmmaking to content? That's corporate values that don't get to where they need to be as far as what they have on hand.
Right.
Like, I don't want my documentaries to be considered content. I want them to be called documentaries because that's what they are. And I think we lose some value of what we have there, which in the end makes people less encouraged to create those things of value. Because with younger generations, unless they're astute enough to find something on their own or fortunate enough to have someone in their life to guide them to those things, they're not going to be aware. And they're just going to go right with the flow, because America, it's very much about what's coming next. We're a disposable nation.
Well, yeah, that amnesia has been, it's been deliberate and strategic, right?
Planned obsolescence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And right. I think, you remember you asked me a little while ago, like, so what do you listen to that's new? And I was like, it's not that I don't listen to something new, but because the way it comes through to me, I literally am going to have to dig out my phone and take a look at my listening history, because I will not have remembered the artists that I was listening to while driving or came up, streaming while I was working around the house. And so, that's the part that I do think the youth miss out on, though vinyl has made a resurgence. I mean, kids are buying records just to have them. They don't even have turntables. They just want the record, because they love that artist.
It's funny that you mention that because that's on my list here. 2022, it was the first year that vinyl outsold CDs since 1987.
Yeah, dig it.
And also, according to Discogs, CDs are also experiencing a revival, which is very strange considering that a place like Best Buy is getting rid of physical media, even though it's growing.
Right.
And just some quick numbers here. Vinyl sales were up 13.2% from 2022 in just the first 9 months of the year. We don't have the final numbers of 2023. It's still too early. But just in the first months of 2023, vinyl sales were up over 13%.
Dig it.
This is an interesting one. I want to showcase here very quickly that not having physical media is actually hurting art overall. So CDs were first introduced in 1983, and they peaked in 1999 with a total of $22.9 billion. Yep. Now, streaming in 2022 hit its record ever of $15.9 billion. So you're still over $7 billion off from streaming to CD peak sales, and that was just CDs.
And we'd be remiss to say that the economics of streaming are disadvantageous for the artist.
And those are 2022 numbers, so it's actually about over $2 billion more, so it's about $24.5 billion. Right. So you're $9 billion off. Because of the convenience of streaming and not having physical media be a priority, you're having artists make less money.
Yep.
So that is yet another reason why I think physical media is so important. Just last week, we did the first podcast of 2024 here, and we did a list of tips for artists to survive in 2024. And on my list was for musicians and filmmakers to release what they create on physical media.
Sure.
Because of how important it is.
Yes.
And again, like you said, okay, somebody's buying a vinyl, and they might not even have a record player. You can put it out on CD, tape, vinyl, whatever. Just give a digital download code. So even if you can't play that physical format, you have it, so it's there forever in case it gets taken off of Spotify or YouTube or whatever, and you have a digital download so you can still access your music, and then you have essentially a piece of art.
Yes.
That's the way I see it, especially these colored vinyl when they put extra time into it.
Right. I'm glad this came up because it's a particular idea that I like to think about a lot, and I value. I value as not just as a professor and a talking head. I value as a DJ.
Well, your collective is all vinyl after all.
Yes, but it's also like the kind of events that I want to do. I had two moments essentially in the last 15 years. One was the switch to essentially Serato and MP3 and streaming technologies to DJ, and I thought about it a lot. It was a difficult moment.
It's alluring.
Yeah. I want to say the late 2000s, entering 2010. I had very few opportunities to DJ, and various DJs who were making the shift were like, "Yeah, Arm, you gotta switch over, man. This is where it's at. Like, why carry around crates?" I was doing interviews of people like Kid Capri, Ron G, others who were like, "Yeah," like right around that time.
All the mixtape guys.
Yeah, and they were like, "Man, I'm done carrying record crate. Are you kidding me, man?" Like, and I get it. They were talking about how they can travel more internationally, do overseas gigs, and so on. I'm not on that level, so I didn't have that to worry about. But I thought about it. Thought about the ability to remix on the fly, a variety of technical tricks that you can do.
They were doing a lot of the CD DJs back then too.
Right. I chose not to go with it. I got to give a big shout to a good friend of mine, DJ Boogie Night, Pablo. He said to me, "Man, we don't really do a lot of gigs. We do those gigs for like family, friends, etc. We're not up in the club with a bottle of bub." And he's like, "And you were going to go do your best friend's wedding. You want to show up with a laptop or do you want to show up with a crate of records?" And it just struck a chord with me like, yeah, I want to pull out Al Green out of the crate. You know what I mean? I want it to have a sense of what you were talking about, a certain sense of artistry. I'm not trying to throw shade on anybody who flips open a laptop and DJs. I'm not calling you not artists, but I'm presenting something as a vinyl DJ that other people can engage with, not just my music, but I put the record album covers out. I invite people to come up and look through it. And so what the Nite Liters do is exactly that. We were brought together by the Twitch community during quarantine, and a big shout out to Metro Sessions, a DJ collective online out in LA that we used to DJ for pretty regularly, and that kept us together in that difficult period. But as we came out of quarantine, I don't know if you're feeling the same thing. I was like, wow, more than ever, I want to invest in physical communal spaces. That's where I want to DJ. It means more to me to DJ a bar with 15 to 20 people than it is to be DJing online and see hundreds of people. Like that number and a bunch of, I'm like, I don't know what that means. Like, yeah, I see the chat flowing. I get it. That's cool. But it just doesn't hit me the way, like when you create culture in physical spaces, how that can transform and energize your community. You never quite know what might happen from these things, you know? And when we do these things regularly and invest in these things regularly, I think this kind of goes to what you're speaking about. We have the opportunity to kind of shape what our community looks like.
For sure. I mean, you're very much in line with, I think, what we're trying to accomplish here with providing a space, not just for artists, but people that want to engage with these creations. You know, and I think, too, going back to what you just said about not making the switch, the way I see it is something very specific attracted you to hip-hop in the beginning, and you've been chasing that. And I don't know if you figured out what that is or not, but I think in the end it's better if you don't, because sometimes the mystique is what makes it beautiful. You made a conscious decision to not chase trends, to chase this cultural artifact that you deem so interesting and important. And we need more people doing that, because I think it's very easy to just drop what's no longer in and pick up the next thing. It's the easiest thing to do.
Right.
You know, I mean, how many people said vinyl was dead?
Right. Yes.
And now it's out selling CDs. And I guarantee you there will be a day, I don't know when it's going to happen, but there will be a day yet again where physical media makes more money than streaming.
Probably.
I promise you. Hey, it might be the fall of society, and that's all we have left is physical media. But, you know, I thought it was interesting, too, about physical media. The Recording Industry Association of America stated that vinyl brought in 41 million vinyl records was sold in the United States in 2022. And that is a 45-fold increase.
Wow.
Since 2006. Want to know what the really interesting part of that is? That doesn't count the used market.
Oh, right.
The RIAA only tracks new sales because those sales go to artists, labels, and songwriters.
Sure.
They don't count the used market because none of those get a cut of it. The used market is apparently even more units than what's being recorded there.
I knew that vinyl sales were up. I didn't know the exact numbers. Those are kind of mind-blowing numbers.
Insane, right? So that's 41 million right there. You're talking about over 80 million vinyls sold in 2022 alone. And that's just in the United States.
You're giving me a lot of credit for my choices that I make.
You made the right choice, my friend.
I sometimes think, like, you know what? I'm just stubborn. I stay in place and they lap me and they come back. Everything comes back around.
But I'm sure when you bring out all those vinyl, like, people probably go crazy when you bring out those vinyls, right?
Yeah, without a doubt.
Well, so what's the reaction to people when they see what you're doing?
Like, invariably, it's enthusiastic. And, you know, from older heads, for people who aren't aware of the stats that you just rattled off, they're excited to be like, oh, wow, like, you guys are actually spinning vinyl. For younger heads, the kids who are a big part of that demographic, right, of buying these records, they've never seen... Like, I remember one particular instance of this one kid standing next to me. He's like, I've never seen anyone touch a record like that before, right? I was back queuing and scratching and mixing, you know. They've just never literally seen it, maybe on a video or whatever, but not in person. And that was really humbling to sort of showcase that. There's forever the analog versus digital beef, you know. I maybe early on participated in those spats, but I don't care anymore.
You were defending what you love, though.
And at the time, I did feel sort of cornered. It was kind of like, yo, convert or die.
Yeah.
You know, dinosaur. I want to give a big shout out to, in addition to Double Decker, Andy Poe and Home Base, doing some of the skate park gigs, like in the early 2010s, were places where Andy was like, yeah, yo, do your vinyl thing. Like that fits what we're doing. We're out here like... That
culture gets it.
Right. Like we're out here grinding,
They were probably some of the same people that were keeping those vinyl sales going on the used market when no one cared.
That held me down for a while. It's been pretty amazing. You got deep with me on a moment there. I was like, yo, Brandon's like peering into my soul, and I dig that. Like that's where I think good conversation goes. I don't have a very explicit reason as to why. I do know that I was struck. I had elements in my family that sort of shaped me in one regard, right? Like my father was a civil rights activist. He marched in Alabama.
Fantastic stuff.
He had crates of records. You know, he's a sociologist himself. That definitely informed me. My sister and brother were into music. That played a part. If I was going to give a moment that hip hop touched me in a way that I couldn't explain, was I was in the basement next to my mom's laundry machine, and I unplugged her laundry machine. I plugged in my boombox to listen to a song called Breakdance Electric Boogie, which, if any head knows, it's a record that has Apache being cut up on it. And when I played that at the age of 8 or something, I felt like I was there. And I don't know where there was. Does that make sense?
Sure does.
It transported me. I was 8. I didn't know what I knew now. Like, I knew that like breakdancing something to do in New York City. I didn't know about the Bronx. I certainly didn't know Apache. But that particular record struck me in such a way that I felt like I had heard it before somewhere. Like, I don't know, like the way the bongos are EQ'd, it sounded like they were bouncing off a building, down the block and bouncing off of buildings. And here I am in the basement plugging into a lamplight, much like they did out in the parks. Like, I don't know what made me do that. And so, a lot of people will talk about in collective art, there's an energy that we share. Are you willing to open yourself up to it? Are you willing to humble yourself to it? Because it can take you in directions you didn't expect. And hip hop has certainly done that for me. It's not something that I claim to have mastered in any kind of way. I very much believe that the things that I put into it, hip hop's given me back tenfold. I feel very grateful for that. Some of it is the privilege and the status I have. I'm not going to deny that. I've seen others who are more talented than I have not get the same kind of opportunities. It's foul. And so that's a big part of why in my work, I try to put on artists, entrepreneurs, particularly regional around here, but maybe some of those who are part of this hip hop history, but they're not the LL Cool J's or the Rakims, et cetera. I think they deserve a piece of the limelight as well.
I think what you do, though, is so much the foundation of keeping these things going. Mm. And you talked about those young kids and even old heads that respond to what you do. The longer you do what you do, the more of that you're going to get.
Yeah.
The further we get away from the 80s and when vinyl was no longer king back in the 1980s, the more interesting and important what you do is going to become to people. Because it's like you're not just a museum, it's interactive in its own way too.
Right.
And people get to be a participant in it, not just a spectator.
That's why I've been adamant on having the other elements of hip hop showcased at my events. B-boys in particular bring a kinetic energy. The graffiti is in many ways like it's awe-inspiring, especially when you have an artist creating a piece at an event. You really get the sense of process, right? Like I've arrived at the event and all I see is an outline. I've been here for 2.5 hours. Look at what they created, right? That is a big piece of it.
Yeah, people love watching the creative process.
Yes.
Artists and non-artists alike. I don't think it's any less interesting because you're an artist.
Yeah.
If anything, you're more engaged because you're an artist, because you're maybe reflecting or comparing or just being curious of how this one person creates maybe differently from how you create. Mm-hmm. And what you're describing, that's so important that's why at Arts Fest, we dedicate a whole area to hip-hop.
Yes.
Probably the biggest area of the festival.
Yes.
Is to hip-hop, the graffiti, the breakdance, and the MC. And the one year we did some freestyle battles and the guys couldn't stop their curses, so we had to make them go off mic for it.
I've had that issue. Yeah,
we support that, but
right.
It's a family festival, so just go off mic with that stuff. And
right.
I mean, all the elements are important too. I think the one year we even had an impromptu beatbox battle broke out too.
Say word. Yeah.
The sometimes fifth element of hip hop.
Yeah, and I don't want to knock beatboxing. I guess I've always understood it as an extension of it's like beatboxing. I understand is sort of a combination of DJing and MCing. If a DJ is making the beat and MCs are rapping over it, well, those who are beatboxing are doing both. It is also a very special and unique practice within the culture.
I've always kind of looked at it as like a bonus element.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
You got your four and you got beatboxing. That's your spice.
Say word.
Want to have a little spicy tonight? We can throw some beatboxing in there.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
So I know you got some events coming up. You want to talk about what kind of stuff you're involved with? Because I know there's a bunch of events coming up this year in 2024 regarding hip hop.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate this opportunity to come on and talk about this stuff because
I'm enjoying the conversation, man, truly.
Well, word up. The whole idea of what I've been working on over the last year, we had mentioned a little while ago about are we saying hip hop's eulogy in its 50th year? And I believe that not to be true. I believe that we're establishing legacy. We're raising the standards.
For sure.
What I've gotten the opportunity to do as a professor at Northampton Community College, we have our foundation grants our faculty to explore a particular topic in American culture and history every year. And a couple years ago, I sniffed out the application process and I was like, oh, I want to do this. And they're like, oh, sure. When do you want to do this? Next year? I'm like, no, 2023. I have a very specific year. And they're like, why that? It's the 50th anniversary of hip hop. By the way, just as a quick aside, it's brilliant. Like, it's a brilliant strategy. There's no birth date of jazz. There's no birth date of rock and roll. Like, it has been a very, you're not wrong that that different organizations are cashing in on it. It's a way to frame hip hop in a way that's comprehensible to white people. I'll just be honest with you. Like, those who don't understand, like, oh my God, it's 50 years. Like, they finally acknowledge, like, oh my God, 5 decades of music and culture. Like, this is something to behold. You
and
know?
I'm so glad Kool Herc is still here to see it.
Absolutely, right? So, like, you know, Herc's first party on August 11th, 1973, there's some stories about it. That's not the first hip hop party, and other element. People were writing graffiti in the 60s. Let's be honest, you know?
Well, let's be honest, people were always doing graffiti.
Right.
Cave art.
Right, we'll take it all the way back to there.
But that certain spirit of it, that was
the
closer.
The spirit of it is like Bambaataa, Herc, Flash, Breakout, these DJs that were there early on. Imagine sort of the humility to be like, you know what? Let's point to Kool Herc. You know, there was something special about what he was doing. That's the moment that hip-hop began. How many artists and practitioners of hip-hop have eaten off of that 50 years? I'm here because of that. I'm in gratitude because of that decision of saying, let's look at August 1973. But I saw that and I applied for this grant. And as I mentioned a couple moments ago, what I basically tried to do was that in the fall, I wanted to put on regional artists, whether they be b-boys like Breakin' Steel, graffiti artists from our area. I worked with a cat named Malik Griffin out of Newark, New Jersey that I met through Double Decker. Right?
Wow.
He ran with Tame One from the Artifacts, a great graffiti artist.
Artifacts are a great group, man.
Yeah, man. Multis Con Leche, Raf. I worked with his family.
Raf's the next podcast episode.
Oh, word up. That's perfect. He and his family showcased interactive graffiti installations at Music Fest, at Northampton Community College, and the like. I worked with a variety of different DJs. I'm going to forget someone, so I'm worried about naming them, but I mentioned that Cap's been a real ally in my work.
And you guys do the open turntables, which I love.
Yeah, we've done open turntables. We did an event. I'm so glad we did it. We did turntables at Double Decker in the end of August, celebrating the 50 years of hip hop. I've been working with some cats up in Stroudsburg. The Create and Be Gallery. I want to give a big shout out to Sylvia and Courtney up there, right off of Main Street. Them and Rebellious Entertainment, an artist named Zell. We put on hip hop showcases in Stroudsburg, where the 4 elements are on display: DJing, MCing, graph, and b-boying.
And that's really important too, not to cut you off. The fact that you're going right outside of Lehigh Valley, again, the network, the community is so important.
Right.
So the fact that you're not just keeping it right here, I think is really smart.
Northampton Community College has campuses in Bethlehem, South Bethlehem, and also Tannersville, PA, which is close to Stroudsburg. So I actually teach up there at that particular campus. And so I've gotten to know some folks in that area who were down with this kind of thing. So I've been blessed to be working with some great administrators at Northampton who've really encouraged me. Like, I have not been admonished for thinking too big,
wow,
you know, and it's been really wonderful in that regard. Like, getting free reign, I'll call it that, the ability, like,
creative control.
Yeah. Tell us what you think you want to do. And then, we might have to dial it down a little bit. We can't have the mothership land. I'm sorry, Arm.
But start with your dream scenario.
Yeah, exactly. It's been a great process.
That's
and
awesome.
So that was my fall. Coming up, we have a variety of no less than 3 big activities that I want to highlight. First and foremost, on Thursday, January 25th at Steel Stacks at the Frank Banco Alehouse Cinema, Northampton and Arts Quest is putting on a showing of the movie Wild Style. And if you're not familiar, Wild Style is the 1983 first film of hip-hop, put together by Charlie Ahern and Fab Five Freddy and a couple other producers. It is a really interesting underground film because while it is, quote, fictional, it centers around this graffiti artist named Zorro, who's actually went by the tag of Lee. All the actors in this underground film are actual practitioners, and they essentially create this narrative where they talk about how graffiti is a part of, off the top of my head, I don't think they say hip hop in the movie, or maybe somebody might shout it out, but it's not like they're saying, it's all about hip hop. It's just these 4 elements in their environment being showcased in this movie. So Charlie Ahern put on a variety of different MC crews, breakdance, Rocksteady crew, Grandmaster Flash is in it, etc. It's this great film. What I'm really excited about is that Charlie Ahern himself is going to come, and before the movie starts, we're going to have a Q&A with him.
The director. And
we also have in attendance members of the Cold Crush Brothers.
Woo.
one of the legendary
Yeah, that's dope as hell.
first MC crews. Their outspoken figurehead is a cat named Grandmaster Kaz, who is this charismatic, cold-crushing, body-moving MC that will also be on the panel. From the movie, there is a DJ named Grand Mixer DXT. He's also going to be on the panel and also performing as a DJ, like before and after the movie. DXT, people don't know that name as well as they may know a Grandmaster Flash, etc. DXT is your DJ on Herbie Hancock's Rocket.
Don't Stop It,
Yeah.
Rock It.
So that was a breakthrough jazz fusion hip hop record in 1983 that DXT was featured as a scratching DJ on it.
And you still hear that record all the time at B-Boy Jams.
Yeah, a lot of people credit DXT as taking DJing, hip hop DJing from like just cutting up breaks in the party and creating what we would call turntablism. How can you use this instrument?
Yeah.
This turntable as an instrument.
I love that too. My favorite documentary about turntablism is by director Doug Prey. It's called Scratch.
Hell yeah.
Incredible.
Yes.
And I'm sure you were filled with envy watching DJ Shadow dig in that basement.
Ooh,
Yes, sir.
That was a gold mine.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Sorry, I just had to throw that in there.
We live for those moments, right?
I'm sure, yeah.
Yeah. So again, that's Thursday, January 25th.
And tickets are free.
Tickets are free. All the events we do are free.
Good for you, man.
Yeah, that's a big piece of it.
You're not just keeping the culture alive, you're kicking it up a notch.
I want it to be accessible. I don't want any barriers for our students,
That's awesome,
any
man.
barriers for the community. I think that's another piece I just want to give a shout to NCC for supporting me on, is that while I have done things on campus, most of them have been out in the community. And I thought that was important because I feel as if sometimes when you look my experiences at the major colleges and universities, some really amazing things happen on these campuses, but the wider community don't get to enjoy them.
Well, I feel too often people probably assume it's us and them.
Right, the town versus the gown. Right?
Where I'm not, it's happening there, it sounds cool, but I don't go to school there. I'm not a part of it.
Right, exactly. And so I felt very much on a mission to get these activities out in the community. It's been a very rewarding experience.
You're doing it right, man. Seriously.
Hell yeah. The next piece that is after Wild Style on January 25th that is in the books is Thursday, March 14th. This is a reading and discussion with an author named Shanita Hubbard. Shanita wrote a book called Ride or Die, which was an examination from her own personal point of view as a Black woman growing up with hip-hop in the 90s and the way in which she loved hip-hop, but she also felt very much that in various ways it normalized violence and marginalization of Black women. In this book, you're reading someone who loves the music, and it's a big part of her history and her narrative, but as she becomes a mother, she becomes older, and she also sees some of the detrimental effect that some of the pathos of hip-hop espouse, the objectification, the misogyny of women, particularly Black women. She finds a way in this book to criticize it, recognizing that, like, if I love hip-hop, then I also need to speak my truth to it and have these conversations with people saying, you know, I'm down for the pleasure principle. I'm not doing as good a job as she can. I can enjoy this music, but I also understand that when it is being packaged in this industry and these kind of messages and images are put out over and over and over again, that it shapes my community. And I want to have a voice in that, on how it shapes it and being critical of it. So Shanita and I are going to be at the Luckenbach Mill in downtown Bethlehem, the whitest of white spaces. But I'm excited about this because I want to give a big shout to Historic Bethlehem Museum and Sites, as that they were interested in, listen, 90% of their programming is around historic Bethlehem, but they also recognize they have these great venues where they need to have different kinds of conversations, things that what's that got to do with the historic Bethlehem? Let's find out. Do you know what I mean? Like, before you disregard it as like, why are you holding it there? Why don't you go have it at a college? I was far more interested in having this conversation with Shanita here in Bethlehem and in the community and bringing it into spaces where we didn't expect it. I don't know how you feel as an art gallery owner, but like, I'm always interested in that interplay between an unconventional space and discourse.
I think space is very important, and I think it's a really wise decision to do it in that way. And in general, I think her book sounds fascinating because there's two major issues I had with hip-hop growing up, and the major one was misogyny, calling women bitches, which is like that. I was never cool with that. And the other is homophobia.
Right.
It was extremely homophobic.
Right.
And I know it's done a lot better since then, and that's kind of what put me in the path to listening to more socially conscious hip hop like The
Sure.
Roots and Black Star. And I assume her name is a nod to Rough Riders, Ride or Die.
Yes, yeah, that's a big part of the book is taking a look at that particular song. Like her song is broken into chapters where she takes particular songs, whether it be, I think it's Black Girl Lost by Nas or Ride or Die, or Jay-Z's his Me Culpa in 444, where he comes out and he's like, I did all this dirt, forgive me. And she's just kind of like, what more can you do for us more than me forgiving you? Do you know what I mean? Because you're the person with leverage and power in this scenario.
Absolutely.
It's a really, Ride or Die, Shanita Hubbard. She was a colleague of mine at Northampton, has taught at Northampton ESU, but she's now internationally recognized author and journalist. She's doing her thing, and I can't wait to have that conversation with her. If you will, I'm trying to mirror a little bit, like the fall semester was the old school. It was the party. And then this spring semester, it's a little bit of the new school. It's a little bit of like, where does hip hop as a paradigm of thought, as philosophy, what does that look like? Can we celebrate it and be critical?
Well, and I love the fact that you're doing that right there. I love it. Therefore, it's important that I be critical, because just because I love it doesn't mean it's perfect. And because I love it, I want to see it better. Therefore, I have to speak out.
Right. And traditionally, Black women have not had that opportunity to do that,
No,
right?
not in this country.
It's considered, if they're disregarded by the white establishment, it's considered almost treasonous within Black communities. Like, how dare you speak out against, we've got it bad enough. Now you're attacking, So it's a difficult conversation for Shanita to have. She's really brave in doing so. So that's Thursday, March 14th at the Luckenbach Mill in downtown Bethlehem. And then our big come up that we're super excited about was the ability to acquire Chuck D visiting Northampton Community College. Again, another free event on Tuesday, April 16th. Chuck is going to be coming to Northampton, going to spend some time in our classrooms, breaking bread with our kids. We haven't really structured those activities yet, but likely going to visit some of my colleagues' Soch classes or other classes in which the music and history of Public Enemy and hip hop have relevance, and he'll meet with them. But then at the Spartan Center, which is our big gymnasium, seats, plenty. Thousands. We've got, again, free tickets available where you can come and spend some time with Chuck D. He's...
That's wild.
What's really cool is that he's willing to have this conversation with, like that you and I are have. He's not just going to stand at a podium and talk for an hour. So I'm going to have this opportunity with myself, and then eventually some students are going to join me on stage and kind of have this convo about him. Chuck's a historian himself. He's one of the people that early on put me on to James Brown, Isaac Hayes. I could go on and on where Public Enemy's music pointed backwards, like Black to the Future, like pointed backwards to go forward. And I also think Chuck has been one of the originators to, much like we were talking about LL a few minutes ago, Chuck was the first to say, we're legacy artists. Like Public Enemy's gotten to that Rolling Stone level. I don't have to worry about making a hot hit record. Like Mick Jagger's not worried about whether or not he's streaming. You know what I'm saying? Like, those guys are still touring. And so
Mick Jagger, they just put out a new Rolling Stones record 16 years later, not because they needed money, but because they were inspired to create one.
Right. And that's what, like Public Enemy and Chuck D's, he's like, I feel completely emancipated from this grind. I get to travel the world and connect with the people who love our music, and I get to continue to make that kind of music. I don't mean to speak for them in that regard, but that's a big part of who they are.
Well, that's a beautiful place to be, where you can escape the grind, escape the busy worker bee, exist as a creator and just someone that loves the culture of what you found yourself in.
And let's be clear, like Public Enemy didn't sell like tens of millions of records. It's the respect that they get for their artistry and who they are.
They're a dominant force of the culture for sure.
So having Chuck come to Northampton, those tickets are free as well. There's going to be a website available in the next couple weeks. Just check out northampton.edu or go to my website where I've organized all these activities, 50yearsdowntheline.com. You could check out our mission statement. I also have put up as much video footage of what we've done and some of our promo reels and so on, where even if you didn't attend any of these events, you can kind of get a sense of what it is that we did,
It's really cool stuff. And I imagine you got all these for free because of that funding you were able to get.
The funding has been the big piece. I mean, like when you say get these things for free, let's be clear. They're getting paid, and I've also
well, I mean that you can offer them for free tickets.
Oh yeah, 100%. It has been important for me as well that our regional performers, while they may not be as well known as Chuck D, that they did get compensated. That was a big part. That was a big every DJ on August 11th who spun down at Music Fest for us, I made sure that, they got paid or were offered payment, because I'm like, listen, Music Fest and this event is capitalizing off of all the effort you put in as a B-boy or as a DJ, et cetera, and celebrating hip hop. You should see money for that.
For sure.
You really should see money for that, and not that it's going to change your life or whatever, but it's just a gesture. I feel like the relationships I've developed, how it is as a gallery owner, they're quasi business, art, friendship relationships. Try to be as transparent as possible. You began this conversation with how did you get to be this ARM-18? How did that come? Couldn't ever imagine being where I'm at right now, and consider it a great privilege to be this ambassador of this culture. And every once in a while I get to flex myself on the turntables or, in front of a classroom. It's a real privilege.
Well, and you're doing it right, man. And I'm really glad that you're here in the area and you've taken on these endeavors, because you have the right spirit for it. And it's very reflective of the culture that you love so much. And maybe hip-hop has shaped you in this way. It sounds like it has.
Say word, yeah.
Now, real quick before we go,
Sure.
You did a TED Talk recently, didn't you?
I did.
What was that about?
What was that about? Some of the themes that we talked about today were in that talk. It was, if I remember correctly, it was about the edutainment value of hip-hop. See how it sounds a little irrational? That, we could learn something from hip-hop. Having a conversation with you, someone who has their own experience and their own relationship to hip-hop, I imagine many of our listeners on this podcast may as well. When you're doing a TED Talk, you don't presume that. And that's a space where I imagine, how can I explain hip-hop to the uninitiated? And maybe even the prejudiced, And so I felt it important in the TED Talk to cover the ground of some of the same things we talked about the illegality of the original elements of hip-hop, the socioeconomic conditions, the dire conditions in which hip-hop emerged, and then kind of, if you will, bringing it to our present moment and saying, if you happen to object to the coarse language and the themes and the violence that you see in hip-hop, it could be possibly that a lot of those socioeconomic conditions that we talked about in the Bronx in the 1970s, they're still alive and well, right? The systemic abandonment of our lower class Americans, particularly people of color, a capitalist system run wild that has, in a lot of ways, I think, devalued people over product and profit. And so I think that's still very alive in our music. So that's a lot of what I talked about.
That's great. Yeah, and I mean, in that regard, hip-hop can be used as a mirror for society to reflect on itself. Mm-hmm. It's still something to be talked about and discussed.
It's really interesting. Let's tie it back into our idea about what is a responsibility of an artist, creating here. What is their responsibility to the community? And my thing is, what you hear often in hip-hop is a symptom of our larger social structure. But then at the same time, when you're given the gift to bless a microphone or be a DJ, a graffiti artist, b-boy, what are you doing with that talent? Maybe you have a responsibility there, not just to put up a mirror and say, look at what's wrong. I think that's an important part of the conversation, but do you have a vision as to where we're going? Because we got a lot of people who, they need that kind of hope. And I think if you listen to hip hop long enough, I mean, I look at your shirt and I think about DMX and of almost like a misunderstood artist,
That's how I feel too.
He had these very dark moments on record in his own life, et cetera, but there was also this prevailing spirit that he also shared with us. So much of hip hop, I think, embodies that ability to endure and to transform. Nobody's truly fixed or arrived. It's a process. And I hear that a lot in hip hop.
Very important thoughts to reflect on. Once again, we've been chatting with Andrew McIntosh, aka DJ ARM-18, professor, DJ, and writer right here from the Lehigh Valley. He is going to be a part of a Wild Styles screening on January 25th at the Steel Stacks. The director will be in attendance, and there will also be live performances by the Cold Crush Brothers and Grand Mixer DXT. Tickets are free. Steelstacks.org.
Yep, you can reserve your tickets there.
And if you want to check out what DJ ARM-18 and the Nite Liters are up to, make sure you check them out on social media, DJ ARM-18 and Nite Liters LLC. Again, that's NITE LITERS LLC, Nite Liters LLC. They got lots of cool stuff going on. You're always popping up at different gigs and stuff like that.
A big shout out to my brothers, E-Rock and Big Sur. Like, that's a big creative outlet for me. I mean, obviously you see I'm a very analytical guy. I got moving a lot of pieces on the chessboard to make things happen. But when we show up at the Lafayette Bar or a gig, you know, at the Banana Factory or whatever, like, we just get to spin. And a lot of our music, I would say, is grounded in that idea of one love, like just the spirit that we are one love, one community. Let's get down. Let's feel all right, you know?
That's beautiful, man. I'm glad that you found those guys to be at home with in that way. And I hope others out there listening are lucky enough to find the same thing.
Yeah, word up.
Thank you so much for stopping by the Art Bazaar. I'm definitely going to be there at that Wild Style screening for sure. Can't miss that one.
Man, I can't wait. Thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation.
Thank you for being here. And we're going to definitely have to talk about doing some more events together, maybe some open turntables. You know, the gallery space is here. Would love to see you utilize it for whatever your imagination has in mind.
Word up. Let's talk.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Art Bazaar. And thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll see you next time.